Welcome to 13 Cents More, the podcast. I am E. Probilski, an author, editor, and book publisher. I have done all these different things for many years, and I am here to share book publishing insights, personal anecdotes, information about my books, and so much more. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. This week we are covering something a little bit different than my usual fare. I want to cover a subject that is near and dear to my heart, and I am going to be discussing something about disability. So this is hopefully going to help some folks who struggle with a particular element of the writing process. A close friend of mine messaged me this past week talking about that he struggles with, he can't really read. It's not that he can't read words, it's that he can't sit down and focus and read an entire book. His brain just does not work that way. Now, the conventional wisdom is that if you don't read, you can't write. And to some extent, this is kind of true. In order to write well, we need to study the craft of writing. It's kind of like trying to paint without ever looking at other painters' paintings, or compose without ever listening to music, or having heard music. People like Beethoven existed, but Beethoven heard music before he went deaf, so he had this in his mind, even if he couldn't hear music anymore. What I want to cover today is, this is for people who are struggling with reading, and it's not something like, I don't like reading, so I don't want to. This is for people who cannot get themselves to read for multiple reasons. And this is how you study craft without having to read novels. I want to note that if this was just a matter of the person doesn't enjoy reading but wants to be a writer, I would just tell them, please don't. But in this case, he really does want to become an author, and he loves the written word and he loves stories, but reading books is just not accessible to him. So, here are some of the things that I've come up with that would help people in his circumstance. So if you cannot read for whatever reason, and I mean read in the traditional sense, then here are some ideas that might actually help you. The first thing I want to bring up is audiobooks. I know for me, audiobooks 100% count as reading. It's the same words, in the same order. The only difference is that it's being read aloud by a human. Or, for some people, you can use a screen reader and it will read exactly what's on the page. It's not great, but it is a thing that exists. Most tablets and a lot of the software that comes with them have different options, and they are designed for people who don't have eyesight or who aren't really able to see well, and it reads what's on the screen. It's nowhere near as good as a human narrator, but I also understand that audiobooks are more expensive than regular books, so if you just buy an ebook and have the screen reader read it to you, it is a reasonable way of understanding and hearing the story without having to purchase an audiobook itself. The reason this may help is because while you're listening to this audiobook, you can do other things. So one of the things my friend mentioned is that he can't just focus on reading. He has to be doing something else. So I told him that this might help him because I listen to audiobooks while I'm doing things like cooking or cleaning or going for walks or playing solitaire. I can do it while knitting or painting minis, whatever it is. And for dyslexic folks, audiobooks and podcasts, which I'm going to mention in a minute here, they kind of strip away the difficulty associated with reading text on a screen or page so that you can just hear the story without having to struggle with are the letters in the right word? There we go. See, I just did it. Are the letters in the right order? Are the words in the right order? Do I have to reread a sentence 1,000 times because the text formatting, it doesn't help me? It can help strip away some of those barriers. A second thing that can be helpful is short stories. My friend's attention span is not excellent. He struggles with trying to keep things in order long term when it's somebody else's stories. So I suggested that he try short story collections or flash fiction. They give you the opportunity to study the written word and how people use words in what order in actual writing, but you don't have to spend a long time focusing on it and remember everything. You can still see how stories are composed and how prose is written and how dialogue is written, and it gives you an idea of how those things work. Short stories do have different pacing than novels. That is absolutely a fact, so it will be a different experience in some ways, but it's still what words in what order, and it will help you nail down some of the craft elements, even if the storytelling, the flow of the storytelling is going to be different than it is in a novel. My next suggestion is narrative podcasts. Much like with audiobooks, these are scripted and can teach you a lot about characterization and pacing. Some of them are vignettes with individual episodes covering single stories or short arcs, so it kind of combines short stories and audiobooks. My favorite currently is Old Gods of Appalachia, which I'm really enjoying. It's a horror anthology podcast. There are no jump scares, and the storytelling is phenomenal. The descriptions are brilliant, and much like with audiobooks, these offer you the opportunity to study things like craft, and it gives you the opportunity also, you can listen to this while you're doing other things, so making crafts, playing solitaire, cleaning, walking, any of those other things that give your body a chance to move while you are listening. And some people really struggle with that. I do too. I have ADHD, so sitting still and just doing nothing but read or listen can be a real challenge for me. Things like these podcasts can play in the background while I'm doing other stuff, so I can satisfy that need to move and do things while also studying craft. The other advice I have, one of the other big pieces, is to consume your media intentionally. It's not the same as prose in a lot of the cases, so if you're not looking at books, it's going to teach you some different stuff. But if you study media with a critical eye, you can take in things about how they do like characterization, dialogue, pacing. It's different than it is for a novel, but you are still going to learn things. Video games are different paced than a novel, but if you're studying stuff like how is the characterization done with this character, like what elements tell us who this character is? Do they have any quirks? Does their sense of fashion tell us something about them? Is their vocal tone a thing that tells you something about them? All these pieces you can learn from video games and television and movies and so on. When you're consuming media like television, movies, video games, and like comics, graphic novels, all that kind of stuff, you can learn a lot about the craft. It also changes your relationship with media in general, so that is something to understand and predict. Because if you are watching these things critically, you are going to start seeing the patterns, and it's kind of like the magic goes away a little bit because you know how the soup is made. You can learn to study story structure through those things too, and like predict the beats and know when they're going to be coming. And if you can learn these things, you can apply them to your own writing, and you can actually learn a lot about story structure by watching movies and learning how to feel when those beats are coming, because you can weave those into your books. Obviously, there are things you cannot learn from all of these other types of media. That's just categorical fact. But storytelling is still storytelling. Even if you're doing something like watching Critical Role, spend some time studying what makes it so engaging. Spend time thinking about, why am I enjoying this as much as I am? What specific elements about this speak to me? And how do I create those for other people? When you're consuming your media critically, that means that you're going to be absorbing all of this information and really thinking about it, and that is going to be helping you hone your craft of writing, because you are going to be learning things like characterization, world building, pacing, dialogue. You can learn dialogue really well by listening to what sounds natural in an actual conversation that people say aloud. Dialogue is a thing that authors often struggle with, and listening to it done aloud well works. Next, I am going to bring up, let's say, instructional videos here. You can learn a lot by finding instructional videos on the craft of writing online. YouTube has an absolute motherload of them. You can also use things that are written for dungeon masters, for people who run tabletop games, because there's a lot on there about world building, characters, characterization, pacing. There's a lot of neat information on there that crosses over directly into the realm of writing. While again, this is not going to teach you the specifics of how to string words together and create really beautiful prose, if you're listening to D&D content, you will learn a lot about it. That said, if you're listening to content designed for authors and for writing, you can actually learn a lot about the prose too. So these instructional videos can give you a lot of detail and depth, and you can find people like Brandon Sanderson and Garth Nix and Neil Gaiman, who I know is currently there's some drama around him, but his writing advice is still really good. You can find that all online, and you can listen to it and study it that way rather than just reading books. The last piece of actual advice I have here is to study all the words. Study any written words that you come across and learn everything you can about them. What I mean here is, like, if you come across a funny Tumblr post that somebody shares as a meme, evaluate it. What makes it good? What about the wording or the content is something that captures you? Heck, do that with this blog post or this podcast, however you're consuming this. Whatever it is about the language I use, how does that connect with you? Or how does it not connect with you? Are there text messages you've received that were hard to understand, or that were really clear and well communicated? What makes them better? What makes them worse? You can do this with any kind of written content, from social media posts to news articles to newscasts, if you listen to that. Anything you come across, any written content that is either scripted or planned in any way, you can evaluate all of those things and learn from them. My final thoughts on this whole thing is that it is absolutely true that the fastest and most effective way to learn about the craft of writing is to read books in the genre that you are writing. I can't deny that. I can't pretend it's not true. But just because it's the fastest and most effective doesn't mean it's the only way of doing it. People with disabilities, we often have to find our own path and learn how to do things in ways that make sense for our needs because nobody else is going to tell us how. Conventional advice often doesn't work for us, and our brains or our bodies are just not like everybody else's, so we need to adapt. And that is a universal constant in the life of a disabled person. And I can say that with categorical authority because I am a disabled person, both. I have psychological disabilities, I have learning disabilities, and I have physical disabilities. So I have had to rethink the conventional wisdom in so many ways. It is my hope that this podcast episode or this blog, however you're consuming this, provides you with some useful and effective ways to account for maybe an inability to read the way most people read. And that's for whatever reason. There is no wrong way to do this. The thing that you really need to do here is just study the craft however you can study it. How you study the craft is entirely up to you. There are so many ways you can study craft and learn how to string words together effectively that don't require just reading books. The key here will be to find the methods that work for you and to approach things in a way that allows you to assemble something that makes sense for you, the way you learn, and the way you absorb information. There's no wrong way here, and anybody here saying the only way to do this is to read books in your genre is a little narrow-minded. That may be the most effective way and the best way to learn if you're able to do it. But if you can't do it, that doesn't mean you're unable to write. There is no shame in needing to adapt things to your learning style and to your needs, whatever those needs are. Whether you're disabled, whether you don't have the money or the time to do things, there are a whole lot of ways you can adapt wisdom to meet your needs. And there's no shame in it, so please, please, never, ever feel that you are lesser for having to do things in ways that aren't the conventional method. Your way is fine. You just need to find the way that works for you and your unique needs. And if you are struggling with that, let me know in the comments, send me an email, contact me, and I will do everything I can to help you find a way to navigate through this. If you're listening to this as a podcast episode and you're not on my Substack, you can go to my Substack and leave me a comment. It works just fine. You can send me an email. My website is ehprobylski.com. Contact me there. You can get a hold of me in a whole lot of different ways, and let's figure this out if you are struggling. I hope you have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.